Welcome, one and all, hopefully more all than one, to the first video version of the Hell Going On podcast, where all your teams win, your coaches are fired. It is Friday, November 8th. We've got a Thursday night thriller, and then my top 10 rankings coming up, so stick around through this sick intro. Game recap. Ravens go to 7-3 with a home win over the Bengals, who fall to 4-6. Ravens have now beaten the Bengals twice this season by a combined total of 4 points, after beating them by 3 earlier this year in overtime, and by 1 last night on a failed 2-point conversion by the Bengals. On the Bengals side, Jamar Chase put up 264 yards, part of Joe Burrow's 428, I think, and 4 touchdowns. 3 of them went to Chase. The 264 yards is the 19th highest single game in history, but it's still 2 yards short of Chase's own previous high of 266, which is 16th in history. He is the only receiver with 2 single games in that top 20 all time. Also looking through those numbers of the top receivers in there, I took a look at the games that they played. The only receiver with more yards in a losing effort, there was 1 tie, but there was only 1 game where the guy's team lost. That was Jimmy Smith, 291 yards for the Jaguars in 2000, also against the Ravens. And we all know what that 2000 Ravens defense looked like. One of the greatest of all time. One of the things I noticed between the first half and second half, and there was a clear distinction, because the Bengals, they didn't necessarily own the first half, but it was clear that they had more control of the game. Joe Burrow was scrambling, which is a little strange to me. I know he started to do this a little more, and we saw earlier this year against the Giants where he actually took off and had a pretty great rushing touchdown. But it's still a very weird thing for him to do, because in his career he's always had that sort of more of a Tom Brady shift sort of thing in the pocket. There's different ways that QBs can avoid the rush, but the one thing that Brady always had, being not very mobile, was the ability to just, it's one thing to take off running, go left, go 10 yards to the right. It's another thing to take one step and have this guy fly by you and that guy fly by you. And that was something that Brady did better than I think anyone ever realized, and contributed to a lot of his success. Burrow had that sort of thing for quite a long time, but he has also been sacked a lot more than I think Brady ever did. So it's possible that he has started to come to the conclusion that he can't be that quarterback, at least not behind the offensive line that the offensive lines that he's been behind. So it seemed like he was scrambling a lot more, and I thought of this earlier, but it really struck home to me when John Harbaugh, who is obviously Lamar Jackson's coach, but John Harbaugh comes out at halftime and he's talking to, I don't remember who the sideline reporter was, but she asked him, what are you looking to do in the second half? And he started talking about shutting down Joe Burrow scrambling. Really hit me weird to just hear that, especially coming from the Ravens coach, talking about the thing we need to stop is Joe Burrow from scrambling. Maybe I'm overthinking it. It's just one of those things that hits the ear wrong. But he was right. It was something that was that they were struggling against, and it was something they needed to stop. And they finally started to later in the game. Um, it took some time to get to that point. They were down 21-7 by the time they did. But, or they were, yeah, the Ravens were down 21-7 by the time they did, um, late in the third quarter before they mounted their comeback. On the Ravens side, I just want to give a little. Over the past few weeks, I've been putting up the paces of some of the players, mostly Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry. A few weeks back, Derrick Henry was on pace to, through 17 games, he actually would have broken the record for rushing yards in a season. He would have been at 2,120, beating Eric Dickerson's 2,105. But he's since slowed down a little bit, but his yards per carry is still as high as it's almost as high as it's ever been. He's at 6.1 yards per carry. With the number of rushing attempts that he has right now, that puts him tied for fourth all time with at least that many rushing attempts, tied with Barry Sanders in his co-MVP year with Brett Favre in '97, and behind guys like Jim Brown and Jamal Charles, and someone from that AFC league that in the late '40s that got shut down. Hi, Betty. Might as well join the broadcast. This is Betty Boop. Hi, everyone. Okay. So currently Lamar's pace after last night, through 10 games, is 41 touchdowns, and this is rounding. And I just went by the normal rounding rules. 4 and down goes down, 5 and up goes up. He would be on pace for 41 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 4,537 yards passing, 915 yards rushing. Those are some serious numbers. And even to be on pace for that is unlike anything we've ever seen from him. It's the only time that he's ever statistically been that much higher than not his rookie year, his second year, but his first year as a starter. Throughout this, last night he was over 75% completion percentage, bringing his season completion percentage up to 69.1%. Not bad for a running back. Take that how you will. So Derrick Henry obviously didn't get as many carries as he would have liked. Couldn't get going early on with the team falling behind. Speaking of Derrick Henry and behinds, I'm sorry to even bring this up, but if you were watching closely last night, it was really hard to miss the full moon on his 8-yard run in the fourth quarter. Yeah, that's not for you. If you saw it, you might have thought, and you were listening to the broadcast, you might have thought Al Michaels and Kirk Herbstreit either missed it or chose not to comment until Al read us the new down and distance and said it as second and a deuce. Don't think that was a mistake. That was classic Al Michaels. I don't tell you this just because he's a legend, but because I heard some trash talk last night about him getting old, and I just felt like I needed to report this bit to reinforce his legendary status. I wouldn't doubt if he looked at Kirk and they kind of had that eye contact, and he was like, "Don't worry, I got this." That's the sort of thing that Al Michaels brings. So, down 21-7, late in the third quarter, the Ravens score 4 straight touchdowns from the end of the third quarter through the end of the game. They scored in all their last 4 possessions save for the final one when they just took a knee or two knees to close out the game. As the Ravens took the lead, the Bengals stayed in it, scored what would have been well, they did actually score a tying touchdown. The Ravens went up by 7. Bengals had, I can't remember if it was one play or it was a very quick one, long touchdown to Jamar Chase. I'm going to call him Jamal Charles. I don't know how many times, but quick touchdown to Jamar Chase to tie it at 28, and then Ravens scored again, and then it was another uh, long drive from the Bengals to bring them to the point of either tying it with an extra point or winning it with a 2-point conversion. They decided to go for 2. It sucks that it didn't work for them. Sucks for them. Obviously not for Ravens fans, but for Bengals fans, yeah, it sucks it didn't work. There could have been a penalty called in that play, but I tend to look at these things. Sorry, there you go, Betty. But I tend to look at these things in the in the perspective of what I've heard from so many NFL players over the years, which is you could call it penalty on every play if you really wanted to get down to it. Um, and everybody tends to want to say the refs have it out against insert my favorite team here. At the end of the day, there was I hate that cliche. Anyway, but ultimately, at the end of the day, at the end of the game, he threw it over his receiver's head. There was no interference on that play. There may have been a hold elsewhere. It could have been called, but anybody that has ever watched football knows that at the very end of the game, when the game is on the line, the refs are far more likely to just let you play. Ultimately, it was the right decision to go for 2, in my mind. You're on the road against a team that your defense hasn't kept out of the end zone for the past quarter and a half, and you got a chance to steal a major division win and get out of there. I don't have the data to back it up, but I'd be very surprised if going for 2 in that spot wasn't the best decision uh, based on the analytics, as well as just the gut feeling of let's just get out of here like we stole something. So, end of the game, the Ravens hold off the Bengals 2-point conversion and take the knee a couple times and win it 35-34. Um, they have had a few games this year that I've had some questions with. I mean, the early loss to the Raiders, and then the loss to the Browns, where they just kept dropping passes that Jameis Winston was throwing right at them. But ultimately, there are some defensive issues. There's some secondary issues. But this is the most complete and dominant offense I think that we've seen in a very long time. And different things could happen this week, but I think that we will come out of this week still talking about Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry as 1 and 2 in the MVP race, potentially 1 and 1 in the MVP and Offensive Player of the Year conversation. 1 for each of them, obviously. It's running backs don't get the MVP play that QBs do, obviously, but when you're on the same team like that, obviously the QB has a big role in all of that. So, on to the power rankings. At number 10, I'm not doing all 32, possibly ever again. I might do it in the early season each year, but at some point it just starts to get repetitive. We're talking about teams that, if I'm in week 10 and I'm talking about your team and who they might draft, it's probably time to stop talking about them and what they can do this year. So, starting at number 10, the 6-3 Packers, who just lost to the Lions 24-14. I was really confused about sending Jordan Love out there against the Lions, a strong defense in the pouring rain. To me, this is just simple risk reward. Everybody knew the ground game would be important for both teams in these conditions. 1 second, Betty, come here, come here, come here. You are gonna stay right here. She's eating her brother's food. Okay, so you have Jordan Love, who has a pulled groin, and soft tissue injuries are the worst from the standpoint of, yeah, it's not, a pulled groin sounds minor. It's not going to keep you out for a very long time, but those are the sorts of things that linger. We knew the ground game would be important. Malik Willis has shown himself to excel in that area, so why not let him go out there, play this game in the slop, and give Love another week to rest. Um, the other thing with these tissue injuries like this, the strains and it's not a sprained ankle, it's a strained, you're talking about ligaments, tendons, things like this. And when you have those sorts of things, your body has to react to compensate for it. He had the MCL injury in week 1. You can bet that probably played into the groin injury. And if he doesn't give this injury enough time to heal, and the way it sounds is that he's not, it looks like he's going to play this coming weekend. I'm not going to pretend I'm a doctor or that I know what's going to happen, or maybe they have all the ways to keep him safe and protected from it, but it's also possible that the groin injury leads to an ankle injury or a hip injury or another knee injury, but worse this time, maybe an ACL this time, and then he's out for a year and a half. I said in the power rankings, with it being so close to the groin, what if he messes up his hip flexor? Anybody who's ever had that injury, if you ever tried to play football with it, it is near impossible. If it's bad enough, you can hardly walk with a hip flexor injury. When I played football in high school, I tried to play for 2 weeks with a hip flexor. Result was I was worthless on the field, and when I finally fessed up, my recovery took far longer than it should have. And I mean, that was a quarter century ago, and I still feel that injury sometimes. So, Jordan, just take a break. Be the QB who puts his health first, because he knows football games are won by healthy players. And I love Malik Willis, but we need, I shouldn't say we, I'm a Packers fan, deal with it. But the Packers need Jordan Love for the long haul. At number 9, Pittsburgh Steelers. They were in a bye last week. It was a good time for a bye as Russell Wilson continues to acclimate. Steelers prepare for a couple of bangers coming up against the Commanders and the Ravens. It made me curious, and I know Justin Fields was coming off an injury himself, but last week anyway, he went out as the emergency quarterback, not the backup. The backup was Kyle Allen, but it made me wonder. You're going up the next 2 weeks against 2 really good teams, and you're playing against Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson. Do you put Justin Fields out there to play to do some scout team reps, or you got to let him rest, but you also need him to be the backup and be ready to go out there because Russell Wilson isn't getting any younger, and Kyle Allen can't do those reps and give the defense a good look. So just a curious thing that crossed my mind, but we'll have to see what comes back out there after they had their 2 weeks to rest. At 8, the Atlanta Falcons. Whatever team was out there a few weeks ago against the Seahawks that got walloped 34-14 had to be some group of imposters because before and after that game, I haven't seen them as anything but a deep playoff team. Since that game, Kirk Cousins has completed 80%, nearly 80% of his passes for 7 touchdowns and 0 picks. Bijan Robinson on pace for his first 1,000-yard rushing season. He was only 24 yards short last year, but he's set to go well over this year. And the defense is hanging in there. Makes me wonder if they're, if we get to a Ravens Falcons Super Bowl somehow. I'm not a gambler, but if there's a certain kind of bet you can make about the game being both teams scoring 30 plus points, I would take that one because both of these defenses are not great, but do just enough to hold up so that their powerful offenses can run it up. At 7, the Philadelphia Eagles. I put up a YouTube video of Saquon Barkley. I didn't see the play live. If you watched any highlights this week, you know the one I'm talking about because it's literally the first highlight or the biggest highlight that you saw from the past week coming from Saquon Barkley. He is just ridiculous. I grew up playing Madden on PlayStation. I think this past year was the first year I stopped. I didn't buy the new one because I don't need to buy another updated roster until they actually do something with the game. But Saquon I've had the name going for him where I started calling him Circle Button Saquon because so many times over the years you would see him just stop, hit that circle button, and spin. Then he threw in a little backwards triangle, the jump or hurdle, I guess you could call it. Uh, I don't even know what you would call what he did, but it was wild. I got the video short on my blog and on my YouTube page if you want to give that a look. Between him and Derrick Henry, man, we are watching two generational talents at the same time. With Saquon still staying healthy, knock on wood, uh, and the way that they're playing, I can't say enough. Don't sleep on the Eagles. I don't hear much chatter inside or outside Philly about how far they could go. I feel like everyone is just waiting for some sort of plummet. But, I got to wonder what if that never comes. They've won 4 in a row. Their remaining schedule isn't that hard outside of a game against the Ravens and a pair of games against the Commanders. They have a decent shot to, what are they? They're 6-2 now. I mean, 13-4, 12-5 is pretty reasonable. If they can beat some of those tougher games and win most of the easier ones. By the way, just a heads up, Eagles and Ravens is on December 1st. Saquon versus Derrick Henry. I'm looking forward to that one. At number 6, Minnesota Vikings. They beat the Colts 21-13. It was not a pretty win. I'm not sure what to say about the Vikings. That's 4.5 games now going back to halftime of the Packers game where they blew them out in the first half and then almost let them back into it before holding off to win at 31-29. And this is obviously weeks ago. But since then, it's been 4 games where they just haven't been. There's something missing, and I don't know what it is. Fortunately, they have uh, a very forgiving schedule coming up. By the time we get to the end of November, they could very easily be 9-2. Um, but even if that happens, I mean, after if you look at the teams they have coming up, if they come out of this month 9-2, we still may not know who they are or how far they could go, which tier they belong in, and it'll be tough to sort out. But December will be a key month for them, and we'll find out really what kind of team they are. At number 5, I believe staying in the same place, is the Washington Commanders, up to 7-2. They beat the Giants 27-22. Sounds a lot closer than it was, but it they had this game under control. I think it was 27-10 before they gave up some late scores, but nothing that actually put them in danger of losing. Even with Brian Robinson Jr. taking a break this week, they put in Chris Rodriguez Jr., split carries with Austin Eckler, and got everything they needed. Jaden Daniels, I don't know what more I can say. He keeps looking better, more mature, and more in control every week. He just keeps on delivering. Um, yeah, the guy's incredible. He is one of one this season. I know that Drake May has looked good at times. I know Caleb Williams has looked good at times. I know Bo Nix has looked good at times. But Jaden Daniels is doing this up against some of the best, some very good defenses across the league, and he is doing it really well. At number 4, again, this was published and put in before the Thursday night game. So at number 4 was the Ravens. At the time, were 6-3, coming off a blowout win over the Broncos, 41-10. Really kind of struck me that, I said it going into the Broncos game that they were 5-3 at that time, and with the schedule they had coming up, I think they have the Chiefs next after the Ravens. They could very easily come out of this month 5-6, and if you look at their schedule, I still do the actual ranking the 32 teams. It's just on a separate page, which you can again find on my blog or on the Power Rankings post. But I still do have the ranks, even though I don't do analysis on all 32 teams anymore. But the way that the Broncos were lined up, they had, and I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but 4 of their 5 wins were against the 28th, 30th, 31st, and 32nd teams in my power rankings. And I imagine those were a lot of the teams in a lot of people's power rankings at those spots. So, uh, you know, they had this chance to go up against the Ravens, and they basically just showed that they weren't ready to play that kind of game. Ravens have their problems on defense, and still Bo Nix and his team could only put up 10 points. As far as really the rest of my thoughts on the Ravens, I've already kind of gone over earlier, talking about just Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, the numbers they're putting up, and so on. So we can skip over that. Going on to number 3, the Buffalo Bills. They are now at 7-2 after a dramatic win over the Dolphins, where Tyler Bass, who earlier in the game missed an extra point, and at the time I was following a one of my favorite writers, Tyler Dunn. Um, I was following his Substack conversation, and he had said, I don't know, he must have said it 2 or 3 times. If that missed extra point is going to come back to bite the Bills, and it did. And late in the game, the Dolphins tied it up, and it was 27-27. And then Tyler Bass comes out and hits a 61-yard field goal to win it. This is why I love this league. It was a tough win. Now they get the Colts coming up, so they should win that one and go to 8-2. Uh, but that's kind of that trap game type of atmosphere, because right after that they have the Chiefs at home, and that's always that hurdle that the Bills have been trying to get over, and consistently beat the Chiefs and feel like they can beat the Chiefs, because if they're gonna go anywhere in the playoffs, chances are it's gonna go through the Chiefs. So it's got to be really hard. I know players will always say we're focused on one game at a time, so on, but that it's lingering in the back of their minds, and it's hard to focus on that Chiefs on that this Colts game coming up. So don't be surprised if the Colts give them more of a challenge than they're expecting, or possibly even win it. But I think they'll have enough to pull it out. At number 2, the Detroit Lions at 7-1 after that win over the Packers, which they once again they didn't do really any one thing better than in the ways that they always do. They're not. This is the most dangerous thing about the Lions. They can win in so many different ways, and this is where they're starting to encroach on the magic that is the Chiefs, because every week, yeah, you can say it's Patrick Mahomes. They always find a way, and we'll get to that. But if you really watch, there are things that the Chiefs do that even if Mahomes has a bad game, the team, something with the team, whether it's the defense, the special teams, you know the running game, the something, if they can keep the game close enough until Mahomes and Andy Reid find what they need, find the pattern that they need to get that last drive, or whatever the case may be. If they can get you, if some part of that team can get you to that point and he can deliver, that is part of that magic. And the Lions are starting to really get that. They will beat you down the field. They will grind it out of the ground. They'll punish your offense in the trenches, or they'll sit back and create turnovers. They have all these tools, and Jared Goff is, I'm not going to say just as capable, but he's very capable of being that QB uh, that can just deliver at the end of a game. The one thing I would say that they have different than the Chiefs, and this is where the debate between Lions and Chiefs at 1 and 2 goes, is uh, the Lions can beat teams, like beat them. Really, they did it to the Packers. 24-14, you know, as with other games, sounds a lot closer than it really was. It was essentially 24-6 before a late touchdown. But the Lions, the week before that, was it the week before that when they won 52 to 14 um, over someone, and then they beat the Cowboys 47-6 or whatever, and just just they're doing it in a lot of different ways, but they are just beating teams into submission. Um, my one hang up, and maybe it's not fair to him, but Dan Campbell is an incredible coach and leader, and probably an inspiration to his team. And They all see him as, you know, he's not just the coach who sends you out there to do something that he's never done. Dan Campbell did it for a long time. Um, but sometimes that moxie gets a little the best of him. And I don't know if I was a Lions fan, I don't know if I would be ready to trust him yet to make the right decision when it counts the most. Just where I'm feeling with him right now, especially because when you do get into this realm where you're talking about it's the Chiefs and the Lions, um, you really have to start thinking about if the decisions that are made at the end of a game when you're going against Patrick Mahomes. Um, Last thing on the Lions, just want to reiterate something that I said um, during the game a few times, and to others and with others after the game, and it was in agreement with many other Packers fans. Brian Branch shouldn't have been ejected. It was a penalty. Yeah, it was a hit that didn't need to happen the way that it happened. Is a penalty. I don't even think he would. I don't know if they interviewed him or anything, but I don't even think that he would debate that. Uh, but the ejection and the reason it bothers me is because the ejection muddies the waters of what it should take for a player to get ejected. And I can guarantee you in the coming weeks, you're going to see memes. Someone's going to show you, whether it's videos or they're going to show you still pictures, they're going to show you something. And it's going to be uh, some guy hitting a QB similarly or even harder or worse or in more, you know, more helmet to helmet contact. And that guy is not going to get ejected and it's going to get overblown because of that play. So just wanted to put it out there that, I'm sure Lions fans were pretty upset about that. He's a big time player. I'm glad it didn't, as much as I didn't like that the Lions beat the Packers, I'm glad that that ejection didn't play into the who ultimately won or lost the game. At the top, probably not hard to guess, the Kansas City Chiefs, who just beat the Buccaneers 30-24 in overtime on Monday night. I I thought for a split second that the Bucks had him, and silly me, as it always goes, the Chiefs were down 17-10. I assumed they would come back, and they did. Then I assumed that they would take the lead, and they did. And with the Chiefs up 24-17, Baker Mayfield put together an improbable drive, throwing it to Kate Otten, who just exploded. I mean, he's had good games before, but with all the wide receiver injuries, he is really taking it on. Um, Sterling Shepard on that drive was fantastic. I've always liked him as a receiver when he was with the Giants. Uh, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin out, Sterling Shepard has a chance to really build up a rapport with Baker. He's not that old yet, and they could do some really great things for years. And then finally the touchdown to Ryan Miller. I watch a lot of football. I'd never heard of him, but he scored. He caught that touchdown, and this same topic came up in talking about the Thursday night game, and it's interesting that you know within 4 days we had two primetime games that had this come up, where it was the Monday night game, the Chiefs and the Buccaneers, where the Bucks brought it back. It was 24-23. They had choice to kick the extra point or go for two. They're on the road. It's in the rain. They had all the momentum in the world. Uh, and it was really telling after the game. I didn't actually see it. I read about it later that Andy Reid um, was asked about them not going for two in that spot, and he said, "I'm glad they didn't." It's a silly little throw remark that sounds like he's just sort of saying, "I'm glad that it ultimately ended up the way that we wanted it to be. It could have been different," but I think he knew, as a coach who has done this sort of thing a lot of times, he knew that they did not have the momentum on their side, and he knew that if they had gone for two in that spot, it was a very good chance that they could have pulled it off, kicking the extra point to tie it. And who knows if he would have even made it? I mean, that's extra points aren't a simple thing anymore. We're seeing guys like just talked about earlier, Tyler Bass of the Bills, a very reliable kicker who missed an extra point, even though he hit the 61-yard field goal. But we've seen other Justin Tucker doinked one in on an extra point earlier, and he may go down as the greatest kicker of all time. So extra points aren't a sure thing anymore, and the conditions and all the other things going on, it really really surprised me. And then even to hear Baker Mayfield afterwards say that, oh yeah, it was the plan, we weren't going to go for it. um, I know this sounds like hindsight. um, uh, Maybe it would have been different if the Chiefs didn't win with win the overtime toss. We would have all forgotten about the extra point, and everything would have been different. Um, but the way the Bucks are moving the ball to get 2.5 more yards and potentially win it, instead of just crossing their fingers that they win the toss and hope to win it in overtime, you got to take it when it's there. So the only way I see the Chiefs lose a game this year is if someone blows them out right from the start, the way that the Lions have been doing to teams. Otherwise, Andy Reid will always dive into, I've had this idea in my mind for a while of Andy Reid having a second set of playbooks, sort of like a second set of books, because they could have the Chiefs could go the entire game and score, 7 points, 10 points, and they will get to that. And like I said before, the defense will keep them in it. The special teams will keep them in it. The running game will keep them in it. The something will keep them in it. And then they'll get to that point where the game is on the line, and it's like he pulls out another playbook that he had hidden somewhere deep in his memory, and he just pulls it out, and it's like it's just something that him and Pat know to deliver a perfect drive, and it never fails. And so far this year, it just hasn't. So that's the power rankings. Tell me where I was wrong in the comments on whatever podcast wherever you are listening to this or watching this. Uh, Thank you for watching and listening. This is the Friday edition of the Hell Going On podcast. You can always find more content from me at my website, thehellgoingon.com, where you can also find all of my social links. And come follow me on all or just your favorite one and chat with me in real time on game days. I love talking about football as it's happening. It's the most fun part for me. As always, may all your teams win or your coaches be fired.